Before we begin, if you're already enjoying this type of content, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Now let me tell you about an extraordinary story of survival and unexpected family bonds that will unfold over the next few minutes. In the depths of a brutal winter, when temperatures plunged to -34 degrees Celsius, a desperate mother made an impossible choice, and a lonely mountain man answered a call he never expected. This is a story about how the warmest bonds can form in the coldest places. Let's begin. The wind screamed across the mountainous terrain of Colorado like a living thing, carrying with it temperatures that could kill exposed skin in minutes. Tom Henricks hadn't ventured down from his isolated cabin in 3 winters. At 42 years old, he'd grown accustomed to solitude. The mountains, the snow, the silence. They suited him better than people ever had. His cabin, built from salvaged wood and weathered stone, sat nestled against a rocky outcrop about 12 miles from the nearest road, a distance that had become both his sanctuary and his prison. On that particular evening, with the thermometer outside reading -34 degrees Celsius, Tom sat by his wood-burning stove, listening to the radio crackle with weather warnings. The blizzard had come suddenly, catching travelers off guard. He'd stocked his supplies weeks ago, as he always did before winter deepened, so the storm outside meant nothing to him. Another night, another day, another month of solitude. Then came the sound, faint at first, nearly indistinguishable from the howling wind. Tom froze, his cup of black coffee suspended halfway to his lips. He heard it again, a voice, human and desperate, calling out into the darkness. Without thinking, he moved to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. The snow fell so thickly that visibility extended only a few feet beyond the porch. He could see nothing but white. The voice came again, closer now, anguished and barely audible. It was a woman's voice, and beneath it, fainter still, another sound, a child crying. Tom's chest tightened. He'd spent 15 years avoiding human contact, building walls as thick as the snow outside. People brought complications, pain, expectations. Yet something primal stirred in him, something he thought he'd successfully buried years ago. He grabbed his heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around his face, and pushed open the door. The cold hit him like a physical force, stealing his breath. Snow swirled around him as he stepped into the darkness, his eyes searching the white void. "Hello! Hello! Where are you?" he shouted, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. "Here! Please! We're here!" The voice was weaker now, coming from his left. Tom moved toward it, his boots breaking through the crusty snow. His eyes watered in the bitter cold as shapes began to emerge from the whiteness. A car, buried halfway in a snowdrift, and beside it, a woman kneeling in the snow, cradling something against her chest. She was barely conscious, her lips blue, her breathing shallow and rapid. The girl she held couldn't have been more than 6 years old, wrapped in a thin blanket that offered almost no protection against the elements. Both were hypothermic, their situation critical. The mother looked up at Tom with eyes filled with desperate hope, and something else, relief. Acceptance. She was giving up, Tom realized, preparing to die. She'd simply wanted someone to find them, someone to try. "Come on," Tom said, moving toward them. "We need to get inside, now." He didn't wait for a response. Years of isolation hadn't diminished his strength. He scooped up the little girl, blanket and all, holding her close to his chest. The mother tried to stand, but stumbled. Tom caught her with his free arm, supporting her weight as they struggled back toward the cabin. The warmth inside was almost shocking after the brutal cold. Tom laid the child on the thick rug in front of the stove, then helped the mother to collapse beside her. Both were shaking violently, their bodies racked with involuntary tremors, a sign their cores were dangerously cold. Tom moved quickly, his years of solitude having taught him self-sufficiency. He retrieved blankets, wrapped them around the mother and child, and brought water that was warm but not hot. Too rapid a temperature change could be dangerous. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for finding us. I thought..." She couldn't finish. She simply stared at him with gratitude that seemed to contain all the desperation and hopelessness of the past hours. Tom didn't respond. He was already moving to the window, seeing the mother's abandoned car through the darkness. The storm had nearly covered it completely. By morning, it would be invisible. They'd been minutes away from freezing to death, probably less. He'd been minutes away from missing them entirely, would have if he'd ignored that sound. As the night wore on, Tom monitored both the woman and her daughter carefully. The child's name was Lucy, he learned, and her mother was Sarah. They'd been driving to Denver when the car had skidded off the mountain road. The radio had stopped working almost immediately. Sarah had tried to walk for help, but the cold had been too much. She'd returned to the car, knowing it was a death trap, but unable to think of anything else to do. She'd held Lucy close, keeping her alive through the hours, and when she saw Tom's light through the snow, she'd stumbled outside with her daughter in her arms. As Sarah dozed fitfully beside the fire, with Lucy curled up between her and the warmth, Tom sat in the darkness of his cabin and felt something shift inside him. The walls he'd built weren't quite as thick anymore, and somehow he knew they wouldn't be rebuilt. If you're enjoying the story so far, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If this kind of content is resonating with you, your support really helps us keep creating these incredible narratives. Now let's see what happens next. Morning came slowly in the mountains, the sun rising late and weak behind the thick clouds. Tom woke in his chair, his neck stiff from the awkward position. His eyes moved immediately to the figures on the rug. Sarah and Lucy, both still sleeping. Their breathing more regular now, their color returning to something closer to normal. Neither had developed signs of serious frostbite, though they'd come dangerously close. Another hour outside, and it would have been different. Sarah woke first, her eyes opening with confusion before memory crashed back in. She sat up carefully, looking around the sparse but clean cabin. Tom watched as her gaze landed on him, and the relief that flooded her features was profound. Alive, they were alive. She looked down at Lucy, still deeply asleep, and her eyes glistened with tears. "How long have we been here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Since about 9 o'clock last night." "You've been asleep for about 6 hours?" Tom stood up, his joints protesting. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been frozen and thawed," Sarah replied. She moved her fingers and toes carefully, checking for damage, but intact. All of it. She looked at Lucy again. She's fine. Better than fine, actually. Kids are more resilient than adults in these situations." Tom moved to a small window. The snow continued to fall, though less heavily than before. The blizzard's still going. "Roads are impassable. You'll be here for at least another day, maybe 2. Sarah absorbed this without panic. "I understand. I'm just grateful. I was so sure last night that we were going to die out there. When I saw your light, when I heard you call out..." She trailed off, emotion overwhelming her again. Tom felt uncomfortable with gratitude. He'd never learned how to accept it gracefully. "You need food," he said, turning away, "and your clothes need to dry properly. I have some things that might fit you. My sister left some clothes here years ago. She was smaller than you, but better than nothing." Sarah looked at the sparse furnishings, the solitary existence evident in every detail. "You live here alone?" "For 15 years, Tom confirmed. He was already moving toward his small kitchen area, a basic setup with a stove and minimal appliances. "Winters are the hardest. I stock up on supplies before the cold comes. I have enough for 3 people for about 2 weeks. Then we won't be a burden for long," Sarah said quickly. "Once the storm passes, we can..." "No," Tom interrupted, surprising himself. "You're not going anywhere, not until you're fully recovered. Hypothermia doesn't just disappear. Your bodies need time to regulate, to restore themselves. You'll stay here, both of you." As if on cue, Lucy woke up. For a moment, her face registered confusion and fear. She was in an unfamiliar place with an unfamiliar man. But then she saw her mother, and the fear dissolved into relief. She scrambled over to Sarah, who wrapped her arms around her daughter, checking her over for injuries. "Are we safe, Mummy?" Lucy asked, her small voice uncertain. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe," Sarah assured her. "This man, he saved us. We were very cold last night, and he brought us inside where it was warm." Lucy looked up at Tom with the unguarded curiosity of childhood. "What's your name?" "Tom," he said simply. "I'm Lucy. I'm 6. She held up her fingers to demonstrate. "Are you going to live with us, or are we going to live with you for a while?" The innocence of the question caught Tom off guard. He found himself almost smiling. "I think you're going to stay with me for a while, until the snow stops and your mum is all better." "Can we have breakfast?" Lucy asked, already moving past the trauma of the previous night with the remarkable resilience of childhood. "I'm really hungry." Tom prepared a meal: hot oatmeal with dried fruit, hot milk with honey, and toast with jam. He hadn't cooked for anyone else in 15 years, and he found himself second-guessing his portions, wondering if it was enough, if it was too much. Sarah and Lucy ate with the hunger of those who'd come close to not eating again, and Tom watched them with an expression that seemed torn between discomfort and something else, something that might have been contentment. As they ate, Sarah explained her situation. She was a nurse recently separated from her husband. She'd been driving to Denver to take a new job, to start over with Lucy in a place where they could build a new life. The car accident had been a moment of terrible timing, a patch of black ice, a skid, and suddenly they were off the road and into the wilderness. "You were trying to walk for help?" Tom asked. "I had to try," Sarah said quietly. "I had Lucy to think about. But after 20 minutes, I knew I wasn't going to make it. The cold was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was so intense, so complete. I realized we were going to die out there." She looked at Tom with raw gratitude. "But then you found us. The wind brought your voice," Tom said. "If the wind had been different, if the sound had been swallowed up." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of simple human connection. Tom felt the touch like electricity. He'd been isolated so long that human contact had become almost foreign. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let his hand rest there for a moment before standing up to clear the dishes. The storm continued for 2 more days, but its intensity diminished with each passing hour. The wind that had howled with murderous intent settled into a steady, almost peaceful whisper. Snow continued to fall, but gently now, accumulating in thick, pristine drifts that transformed the landscape into something almost impossibly beautiful. Tom's cabin, which had seemed spare and lonely before, became a center of activity. Lucy had energy that seemed boundless despite her ordeal. She explored every corner of the cabin, asking endless questions about everything she found. Why was there no television? Where were all the toys? Did Tom ever get lonely? Her questions were sometimes piercing in their innocence, and Tom found himself actually answering them, something he rarely did with anyone. Sarah helped where she could, recovering gradually from the physical ordeal of hypothermia. She organized Tom's supplies, cleaned areas of the cabin, and prepared meals alongside him. She had the calm competence of a medical professional, and she kept careful watch on both Tom and Lucy for any signs of illness that might develop. What neither of them expected was the way they began to fall into rhythms, the way the cabin began to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. Tom, accustomed to silence, found himself talking more than he had in years. Sarah listened with genuine interest, drawing out stories from him, not prying, but genuinely curious about who he was and why he'd chosen this isolated life. One evening, as Lucy slept between them on the rug in front of the fire, Sarah asked the question directly. "Why did you come to the mountains alone? What were you running from?" Tom was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. The wind outside settled into a distant murmur. Finally, he spoke. "I wasn't running from anything exactly. I was running towards something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I grew up in a broken home. My parents fought constantly. I had a sister, Emma, the one whose clothes I offered you. She was older and she tried to shield me from it all. But you can't really shield yourself from that kind of pain. When I was 18, I left. I went to the city, tried to build a normal life, but I couldn't connect with people. Everything felt artificial, performative. I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. So I came here. The mountains don't ask you to pretend. They don't care if you're broken or damaged or incomplete. But you were lonely, Sarah said gently. Yes, Tom admitted. I was, but I told myself loneliness was better than pain. Loneliness was something I could understand and control. Other people are chaos, Sarah smiled sadly. Other people are chaos, she agreed, but they're also the only thing that really matters. Lucy changed my life the moment she was born. Suddenly my pain mattered less because her well-being mattered more. My fear mattered less because protecting her mattered more. People are chaos, yes, but they're also meaning. Tom looked at Lucy, sleeping peacefully, her small face serene in the firelight. When I heard your voice in the snow, I didn't think, he said. I just moved. And when I saw you holding her, when I realized you were willing to die in that cold to keep her warm, I understood something I'd been running from for 15 years. We're not meant to be alone. We're meant to need each other. Sarah reached over and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt revolutionary to Tom. You're not alone anymore, she said. The words hung between them, heavy with implication and possibility. If you're loving this story, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. Also, drop a comment below and let me know what you're thinking about this story so far. Now let's continue. On the 5th day after their arrival, the snow stopped completely. The morning broke clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed almost unnatural after days of grey. The temperature had risen slightly, though it was still well below freezing. Tom stepped outside to survey the road situation, knowing that his guests, though he no longer thought of them as such, would need to continue their journey eventually. But as he stood in the pristine snow, looking at the drifts that buried the path down the mountain, he found himself hoping the roads would take longer to clear than expected. Inside, Sarah was teaching Lucy to make pancakes, the two of them laughing as Lucy attempted to flip one and sent it flying across the small kitchen. Tom watched from the doorway, and something in his chest shifted permanently. He understood in that moment that his life as it had been was over. The isolation that had defined him for 15 years couldn't contain what he was beginning to feel. After breakfast, and after Tom had cleaned up the pancake casualties, he sat down with Sarah while Lucy played with some toys Tom had found in a storage chest, remnants from his sister's childhood visits. The road should be passable in a few days, he said. A plow will come through and you'll be able to get to Denver. Sarah's expression flickered with something Tom couldn't quite read. Relief? Disappointment? That's good, she said carefully. Lucy and I have a new life waiting for us there. A job, an apartment, a fresh start. I know, Tom said. That's important. I understand that. He paused. But I also need to tell you something. I need to tell you that these past 5 days, they've been the most meaningful days I've had in 15 years. Not because you saved me from isolation, though maybe you have, but because of who you are, both of you. He stood up, feeling like he was stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was ground below. I know this is sudden. I know I'm a stranger, essentially, but I'm asking you to consider something. Stay here. Not forever, necessarily, though I'd like that. But stay through the winter. Let me know you better. Let Lucy adjust to safety and warmth. Let me prove to you that people, some people anyway, are worth the risk. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Tom, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, he interrupted gently. I'm offering freely. I have supplies. I have space. He looked toward Lucy. I have something I didn't know I wanted until you both arrived at my door. A reason to believe that isolation isn't the same thing as peace. Sarah stood up and moved toward him. She reached out and took both his hands. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I just came out of one relationship that didn't work. I'm not asking for anything except time," Tom said. "Time to know each other, time to let Lucy feel safe, time to build something real instead of running from pain. If after the winter you want to leave, you can. I'll take you to Denver myself, but I'm asking you to give this a chance." Lucy came running over, holding up a small wooden horse. "Look what I found. Can I keep it?" Tom knelt down to her level. "That was my sister's when she was your age. I think she'd want you to have it." "Really?" Lucy beamed. She hugged the horse to her chest. "Does that mean we're staying, Mommy?" Sarah looked from Lucy to Tom, and her fear seemed to dissolve into something closer to hope. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I think we are." Vou expandir os capítulos 5 a 7 com aproximadamente 1.500 palavras cada. Aqui está a versão estendida. The weeks that followed unfolded like chapters in a book Tom was reading for the first time. Sarah and Lucy settled into the cabin with a naturalness that surprised him. The space that had felt perfectly adequate for one person suddenly felt full of life and purpose, each corner transformed by the presence of others. Lucy developed a routine that gave structure to Tom's previously formless days. She woke early, usually around 6 in the morning, her small voice calling out for her mother. By 7, she'd made her way to the kitchen where Tom was preparing breakfast, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but her curiosity already a wakake and demanding answers. She would sit by the window and watch the snow, narrating everything she saw in a constant stream of 5-year-old observations. "A bird, Tom, there's a bird. Why is it so cold? Does it have a house? Do birds get cold? Do they have blankets? Does snow hurt them?" Her questions were endless, rapid-fire, demanding engagement not just with information, but with genuine emotional consideration. In his previous life, Tom would have found this exhausting. Now, he found himself actually enjoying the challenge of formulating answers that were both truthful and understandable to a child's developing mind. Sarah, meanwhile, became the interpreter between Tom's isolated world and the world that Lucy represented, a world of connection, communication, and emotional openness. She had a gift for it, a natural ability to translate his gruff responses into warmth and to gently guide him toward greater emotional expression. She showed him how to sit with Lucy and actually listen, not just hear. She demonstrated that answering questions wasn't a burden, but a gift, a way of saying, "You matter enough for me to engage with your curiosity." In the evenings, Sarah would work as a remote nurse, taking online consultations and doing administrative work for a hospital in Denver that had offered her the flexibility to work from anywhere during the winter months. She'd explained her situation honestly, the accident, the need to wait out the worst of the weather, and they'd been understanding. It wasn't the new job she'd planned on, the fresh start in a new city that had represented freedom from her old life. But it was enough. And more importantly, it allowed her to be present for Tom and Lucy's growing bond. Tom found himself making small changes to the cabin, improvements he'd never considered before because he'd only ever had himself to care for. He'd never before considered its comfort for others. Now he did, obsessively. He found extra bedding in a storage chest, high-quality things his sister Emma had left years ago, and set up a small space for Lucy that felt like her own. A corner with cushions, some books, a small table where she could draw or play. He reinforced the structure in places he'd neglected for years, focusing particularly on the bedroom where Sarah and Lucy slept, making sure it was secure and warm. He even rigged up a system to heat water more efficiently, making it easier for Sarah and Lucy to bathe in the small washroom, and he insulated the pipes to prevent freezing. But more than the physical changes, there were emotional ones that ran deeper and required more courage. Tom began to speak about his sister Emma, things he hadn't discussed in years, memories of childhood before everything fell apart, moments of genuine connection between them. Sarah encouraged him to reach out to her, not pushing but gently suggesting that reconciliation might be possible. It took him several days to find the courage. Several false starts where he began dialing Emma's number only to hang up before it connected. But eventually, he made the call to a number he hadn't dialed in 5 years. Emma answered on the second ring, and the sound of her voice, older now, more measured but fundamentally the same, broke something open in him that he didn't know was locked. They talked for over an hour, circling around the past, acknowledging the pain, but also discovering that the love that had always existed between them was still there, dormant, but not dead. "I have some people here," he finally told her, "and I think I'd like you to meet them. If you have time, if you'd want to." "Of course I want to," Emma said immediately. "I'm coming up this weekend." Emma arrived during the second week of February, driving up the mountain road in a rental car. She was a woman of about 50, with Tom's dark eyes and a warmth about her that he recognized had always been part of their family before everything had fallen apart. She'd maintained that warmth despite the family fracture, or perhaps because of it. She'd learned to hold on to the good things more fiercely because she'd lost so much. She took one look at Sarah and Lucy and understood immediately what had happened. The way Tom's shoulders were less tense, the way his eyes moved to check on Lucy and Sarah, the way this previously empty cabin was clearly now a home. "Oh, Tom," she said, embracing him for the first time in years. "You did something good. You're still the good person I always knew you were. You just needed to remember it." That night, the four of them sat around Tom's table, an occasion that felt monumental because it was the first time Tom had hosted a family dinner in 15 years. Emma brought wine and stories about their childhood, the good memories that existed before everything became complicated. She talked about the summers they'd spend at their grandfather's house, about the time Tom had built a treehouse and invited every kid in the neighborhood to see it. Tom listened and realized that he'd spent so long focusing on the pain of his family that he'd forgotten the love underneath it, the foundation that had never actually crumbled, just been buried under years of hurt. Lucy was enchanted by Emma, asking her endless questions and climbing into her lap without hesitation. Watching his sister interact with Lucy, Tom saw reflected all the care she'd tried to give him as a child, all the protection she'd attempted to provide before she grew up and had to create her own life. There was something healing in that, something that felt like forgiveness happening without words. By the middle of February, with winter still gripping the mountains fiercely, something shifted again in Tom's internal landscape. Lucy called Tom Dad one morning without thinking about it, casually, the way children do when something has simply become true in their reality. Neither he nor Sarah corrected her. That simple word, Dad, seemed to carry the weight of all his transformation, condensed into 2 syllables. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding from pain by retreating into isolation. He was building something real, something that required courage and vulnerability, but offered genuine connection in return. One night, as Lucy slept deeply on the rug before the fire, Tom and Sarah sat on the small porch that looked out over the snowy landscape, bundled in heavy coats and blankets, watching the stars that blazed so brightly above the mountains that they seemed almost impossible, too brilliant, too numerous, too perfect to be real. The kind of stars you could only see from places far from the world's electric lights. "I've been thinking about staying," Sarah said quietly, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Not just through the winter. I mean, staying, making this real, permanently. Lucy's happy here in a way I've never seen before. She's not anxious or afraid. She feels safe, actually safe for the first time since her father left." Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "And I'm happy, genuinely happy, not just relieved to have survived. And you," she reached for his hand, squeezing gently, "you're becoming the person you were supposed to be all along, the person you were before pain and fear redirected your path." Tom squeezed her hand in return, not speaking immediately. When he did, his voice was rough with emotion. "I don't know if I can give you what a normal person could give you. I'm still learning how to connect with people. I still have bad days when I want to retreat into isolation, when the thought of being around another human being feels overwhelming. I come with baggage and damage and years of loneliness that doesn't disappear just because you and Lucy are here." "I know," Sarah said, "and I'm okay with that. Because on those days, Lucy and I will be here to remind you that you're not alone. That's what family does. They show up for each other, especially when things are hard. They don't leave when things become complicated. They stay. Family." The word that had once meant pain and betrayal and abandonment now meant something entirely different. It meant Lucy's endless questions and her absolute faith that he would protect her, that he would always have answers or would find them. It meant Sarah's steady presence and the way she'd learned to read his moods and offer support without judgment, creating space for his struggles without trying to fix them. It meant his sister Emma coming up the mountain every other week, rebuilding bridges that he'd thought were permanently burned, showing him through her persistence that reconciliation was possible, that family bonds could stretch and bend and still hold. As March approached, the weather began its slow, gradual transformation. The snow that had buried the mountains for months started to diminish day by day, revealing the rocky ground beneath. The temperature, while still cold enough to demand respect and proper clothing, climbed into ranges where survival didn't depend on constant vigilance and preparation. The mountain was beginning to remember spring, beginning to wake from its winter sleep. Tom had made a significant decision during the quiet weeks of February. He'd reached out to a developer in the nearby town, a man named Robert Chen, who specialized in mountain cabin renovations, and they'd engaged in a series of conversations about plans for improving the structure. Robert proposed adding another bedroom, expanding the kitchen to accommodate more than one person comfortably, modernizing the utilities without compromising the rustic character that made the cabin special and connected to the land around it. Sarah and Lucy were part of that planning process, their input shaping the space into something that reflected all of them, not just the isolated man who'd built it 15 years ago. Lucy wanted a room where she could paint, with big windows for natural light. Sarah envisioned a larger kitchen with proper storage, a place where cooking could be an activity they shared rather than something Tom did while they watched. The cabin was being transformed piece by piece, from a refuge into a home. The contractor began work in early March, and the sound of renovation filled the mountain air, hammers, saws, the voices of workers. It was disruptive and loud, a sharp contrast to the quiet Tom had cultivated. But instead of retreating or becoming irritable, he found himself explaining the plans to Lucy, teaching her about construction and design, watching her understand that change could be creative rather than destructive. Lucy had started attending school through an online program that Sarah administered with careful attention. Remote lessons covered mathematics, reading, science, and social studies. But more importantly, they prepared her for formal education in a way that felt appropriate for her situation and developmental stage. But more than the academic preparation, Lucy was thriving emotionally. The trauma of the blizzard, the cold, the fear, the sense that she and her mother might die, had faded into memory, replaced by the security of knowing she was safe, wanted, and deeply loved. She no longer woke with nightmares about cold or darkness. She no longer clung desperately to her mother in moments of separation. She was becoming the child she was meant to be, not the traumatized survivor she'd been in the immediate aftermath of the accident. Sarah had taken a permanent position with a different hospital that allowed complete remote work, a position that had actually materialized as a result of her dedication and competence during those initial weeks of temporary work. She'd established herself as someone invaluable to her organization, someone they could trust to manage complex patient cases and mentor newer staff members, and they'd bent over backward to accommodate her situation, creating a role specifically designed around her needs and capabilities. She was earning enough that they could think about expanding the cabin, improving it, investing in the future with genuine financial security rather than month-to-month anxiety. But the most significant change was internal, invisible to the eye, but evident in every interaction and decision. Tom had begun to work with a therapist remotely, a woman named Dr. Patricia Valdez, who specialized in trauma and isolation issues. The sessions were difficult, often painful, requiring him to examine choices he'd made and patterns he'd established. But Sarah and Lucy gave him reasons to do the work. When depression or anxiety threatened to pull him back into his old patterns, when he felt the familiar pull toward withdrawal and silence, he had people who loved him and wouldn't let him disappear into himself. In mid-March, during one of their regular evening conversations, Tom told Sarah and Lucy about Emma's suggestion. It had been made casually during one of Emma's visits, but it had lodged itself in his mind, impossible to ignore. "Emma thinks I should try to reconnect with my parents," he said quietly, watching their reactions carefully. "My father's been sober for 8 years now. My mother has been in therapy, trying to understand the damage she caused and the role she played in our family's dysfunction. Emma thinks they want to apologize, to try to build something new with me, to have a relationship based on who we are now rather than who we were." "Do you want that?" Sarah asked gently, not pushing but genuinely curious about his feelings. "I don't know," Tom admitted, and the honesty of that admission represented real growth. A year ago, he would have said no immediately, with certainty and finality. He would have said his parents were dead to him, that there was nothing to salvage, that the past was permanent and unforgivable. A year ago, I would have said no. I would have been certain about it, angry about it. But Lucy, he looked at the sleeping child between them on the rug, her small face peaceful in the firelight. "Lucy has taught me that people can change, that circumstances aren't permanent, that it's never too late to try again. She was supposed to be traumatized by the blizzard, by nearly dying, by the loss of stability in her life. Instead, she's thriving because she was given safety and love and the chance to start over." "Then maybe you could give them a chance," Sarah said. "You don't have to forgive everything. You don't have to pretend that what happened wasn't real or that it didn't cause damage. You just have to be open to the possibility that people aren't static, frozen in their worst moments. They can grow, they can change, they can become better versions of themselves." Over the following weeks, Tom engaged in cautious emails with his parents. They were halting at first, full of apologies that he wasn't sure he could accept, words that felt inadequate to the scope of what had happened. But gradually, a dialogue emerged from beneath the apologies. His father sent a photo of the woodshop he'd built, sober and settled, away from the chaos that had defined his earlier years. He wrote about the work he was doing, the satisfaction of building things with his hands, the meetings he attended every week. His mother sent a letter about the grief and shame she felt, about how she'd spent years trying to understand what had driven her to be the parent she'd been, how therapy had helped her see the ways her own childhood trauma had been passed down to Tom and Emma. They asked for forgiveness, knowing they might not deserve it, knowing that forgiveness couldn't be demanded, only offered. Tom didn't offer forgiveness immediately. It wasn't something he could manufacture on demand. But he offered something that might have been more valuable. He offered presence. He agreed to meet them in town for coffee, a public place where he felt safe, where the boundaries were clear, and he could leave if things became too difficult. He let them see photos of Lucy and Sarah. He answered their questions about his life on the mountain, about how he'd survived those years of isolation, about how he'd managed to come back to humanity. He allowed them to be part of his life again, cautiously, with clear boundaries established through therapy with Dr. Valdez, but with genuine possibility beneath the caution. When his parents met Lucy for the first time, in late March, at a park in the town at the base of the mountain, his mother wept, Not the kind of tears that demanded comfort or created obligation, but the kind of tears that came from genuine emotion that couldn't be contained. "She's beautiful," his mother said, watching Lucy chase butterflies through the grass. "And she has your eyes, Tom. Your good heart is in her eyes. I can see it." Tom was surprised to find that he believed her. As April arrived, the mountains shook off their winter blanket completely, as if emerging from a long sleep. Snow retreated to the highest peaks where it would remain until next winter. Flowers began to push through the thawing soil, wild columbines, lupines, fireweed, reclaiming the earth. Birds returned in waves, filling the mornings with songs that Tom had forgotten how to hear during his years of isolation, their calls creating a symphony of returning life. The world transformed from harsh and unforgiving into beautiful and alive, and with that transformation came a sense of possibility and new beginnings. The contractor finished the cabin renovations in early April, exactly on schedule. The expanded structure now included a second bedroom, carefully designed and appointed for Lucy, with large windows facing east where the morning sun would wake her gently. The kitchen had been expanded and modernized while retaining its rustic charm, with proper counter space and storage for a family rather than a solitary man. A small office space had been created for Sarah to conduct her remote work with proper lighting and equipment. Tom stood on the new expanded porch, complete with proper railings and weatherproofing, comfortable enough to sit on without risking frostbite or exposure, and looked out at the land he'd claimed as his own 15 years ago. He could see the path down the mountain clearly now, the road beyond that, where a car could travel easily. There was nothing physical preventing Sarah and Lucy from leaving. No blizzard, no impossible cold, no reason to stay except choice, the most precious and fragile reason of all. Lucy came running out, her energy seemingly boundless, even at 6 years old, her movements confident and unrestricted in a way they hadn't been when she first arrived. She'd grown noticeably in the months they'd been together, become more confident, more secure, her small body filling out as proper nutrition and safety worked their restorative magic. The trauma of the blizzard had been processed and integrated into her story as simply the day her family began, no longer the defining event of her existence. "Dad, Mom says we're going to plant flowers today. Can I help?" Lucy was already imagining the garden that Sarah wanted to create, the flowers that would bloom year after year, physical evidence of their presence on this mountain that would persist beyond any single season. "Of course you can help," Tom said, scooping her up and spinning her around. She shrieked with laughter, a sound that had become the music of his days, replacing the silence that had once felt like peace but had actually been loneliness. Sarah emerged from the cabin, carrying seeds and gardening supplies, her face brightening at the sight of Tom and Lucy together. She smiled at them with an expression that contained all the love and hope they'd built together over the past months, all the small moments of connection and trust that had accumulated into something substantial and real. "I have news," she said, setting down the supplies with careful deliberation, her voice carrying the weight of something significant. "I got a call from the hospital this morning. They want to promote me to a supervisory position. It comes with a significant raise and the flexibility to continue working remotely. They're offering me the role because they say I have a unique ability to connect with patients and staff, that I bring something to the organization that's difficult to find." Tom and Lucy celebrated appropriately, Lucy clapping her hands and Sarah accepting their embrace. But then Sarah's expression became more serious, more tender, her eyes glistening slightly as she took a breath and made her next move. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple silver ring with a modest diamond, elegant and unpretentious. "I know I'm taking a leap," she said, her voice steady but carrying emotion beneath it. "And I know this is sudden in conventional terms, but nothing about us has been conventional. We met in a blizzard. We survived something that should have killed us. We've built a life together in a cabin on a mountain, far from the world's expectations and demands. So I'm asking you directly, Tom, will you marry me? Will you make this family official, not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of the law and the community? Will you be Lucy's father and my husband? Tom felt his entire world crystallize into a single moment of clarity. He thought about the man he'd been, isolated, convinced that solitude was peace, running from the possibility of connection and the vulnerability it required. He thought about the blizzard that had shattered his carefully constructed world and given him something far more valuable than safety. It had given him purpose and meaning. He thought about Lucy's endless questions, her absolute faith in his ability to protect her, her willingness to love him without reservation. He thought about Sarah's steady presence and her quiet strength, the way she'd learned to read his moods and offer support without judgment, creating space for his struggles without trying to fix him or change him. He thought about his sister Emma and the reconciliation that was still unfolding, week by week, visit by visit. He thought about his parents and the slow, fragile rebuilding of relationships he'd thought were permanently severed. He thought about Dr. Valdez and the work of healing, the difficult conversations, and the slow integration of trauma. He thought about all of it, the pain and the growth, and the impossible beauty of finding meaning after years of emptiness. Yes, he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. Then he repeated it louder, stronger. Yes, absolutely yes. Lucy clapped her hands in delight, jumping up and down, not fully understanding the adult significance of marriage, but understanding completely that something important and joyful had just happened. She threw her arms around both of them, creating a tangle of embrace and love. As they began to plant the flowers, red roses, yellow sunflowers, purple daisies, white lilies, each one carefully placed in the soil that had been frozen just weeks before, Tom found himself thinking about how the coldest places on earth contained some of the deepest wells of meaning, how a man who'd spent 15 years believing he was better off alone had discovered that connection was the greatest warmth of all, how the blizzard that had nearly killed 2 people had instead been the catalyst for their salvation and transformation. The flowers would bloom through the spring and summer, receding again as autumn came and winter returned. They would bloom again the following spring, and the spring after that, marking the seasons that Tom, Sarah, and Lucy would spend together on their mountain. Each year would bring new growth, new challenges, new opportunities for their family to deepen and strengthen. The cabin would no longer echo with solitude, but resonate with the sounds of life being lived fully and authentically. Not because they were trapped or forced to stay, but because they'd made the conscious choice every single day to remain connected, to nurture what they'd found in the wilderness, to believe that love and commitment were worth the vulnerability and effort they required. The mountain would witness their wedding in early June, small and intimate, with Emma and Tom's parents and Sarah's former colleagues who'd become friends. It would witness Lucy growing, learning, becoming the full person she was meant to be. And it would be home, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they'd chosen to build their lives here, in the place where a blizzard had brought them together and taught them that the warmest hearts often develop in the coldest climates. If you loved this story as much as I loved creating it for you, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you thought about Tom, Sarah, and Lucy's journey, how their family came together, and what moments resonated most with you. Your feedback and support mean everything to me, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.